next dessert recipe is a rocher. So rocher is a French term for rock, and once they're finished, you'll see why they're called rocks. But these are actually a great bite-sized dessert with a fairly good health profile, and they also make great gifts. And you can really make them to fit in just like a small little truffle wrapper, much healthier than a truffle would be. So I hope you really enjoy this recipe. This also gives me a good opportunity to show you how to do something instead of egg whites. So the original recipe has an egg white that's mixed in, and I'm going to substitute that with aquafaba, which a lot of people haven't heard of, but that's actually, you can make a pretty good egg white replacement by using the liquid that comes in a can of cooked garbanzo beans, also called chickpeas. And usually this is something we would discard when we're using the can of beans, but it's a great way to actually use that. So I'll show you both how to do this with egg white and the aquafaba. So it's not necessary when you're using the egg white to whip this. I find if you're going to use the aquafaba, actually whipping it does give it a little bit nicer texture. So we just want to get the same volume of liquid here as we would have in an egg. So an egg is about 2 tablespoons worth of egg white and about 1 tablespoon worth of egg yolk. So since I'm just replacing 1 egg white, I'm just taking 2 tablespoons of the liquid from the garbanzo beans. And then if you want to whip this up, which again, if you want to make something where you're replacing whipped egg whites, this would be a great substitution. To help it whip and to hold its peaks, you can add a little bit of something called cream of tartar, which helps to stabilize that. It also works well when whipping egg whites if you need to, but again, for this recipe, I won't be whipping the egg whites. You can, if you have like a really good mixing arm, you could do this by hand. I would recommend, if you're not used to doing that, use a hand mixer. It can be like this one, a very inexpensive home hand mixer. And I'll stop at a couple points along the way to show you what egg white peaks, or if you're doing aquafaba, it looks exactly the same, what that would look like. So this is where we just started mixing. There's no peaks here. This is very liquidy, so we'll swish around in the bowl. And this is getting just to the point where we're almost going to start getting peaks, but not quite. So peaks are when you would pull the mixer away and then it would leave little points, and there's not anything happening like that right now. Mix just a little longer and then we'll have soft peaks. So right here, we're just about at soft peak stage, maybe go just a little bit further. But if you pull it away, a peak will stay just for a second. We'll go just another second or two and we'll be perfect. So now I'm between the soft peak and the firm peak stage. So soft peaks will kind of fold over on themselves. And if they just stay straight up and pointy, then that's a firm peak. So, or what they call a stiff peak. It's really not important what it is for this recipe. You can really use it at any phase in the process with the aquafaba. But if you're making meringues and other things with egg whites, it's actually quite important to get the right type of peak. So you can use the aquafaba, or I'll show you how to separate the egg whites now. For a lot of recipes, anything that you're trying to whip egg whites and get a peak, that you're going to use that as the rising agent in a recipe. You don't want to get any egg yolk. It will really prevent those nice peaks from forming, and prevent that fat will prevent getting a good rise in the egg whites. So I'm just tapping the egg on the cutting board, kind of with moderate force. I just want to get a little shatter mark in the middle of the egg, but not to crush it. And then that gives you a spot to put your thumbs. And then you can gently pull that apart and use half the shell to catch your egg yolk, and let whatever egg white drip that's going to drip. And then you can use your hand as a sieve to catch the yolk. And you can gently just transfer the egg yolk back and forth until you get that egg white to come off the yolk. Once you've got all the egg white, you're done. Usually a little tricky to get that last little part that really likes to adhere to the egg yolk. There, and we have a nicely separated egg white and egg yolk. And you just want to double check your egg white, make sure there's no little spots of yellow if you're going to whip it. Again, doesn't really matter for this recipe, but that would be how you separate the two. So now we're ready to, now that we have a couple of options for egg whites here, we're going to finish our Rochers. I'll go ahead and do it like the recipe shows, but again, if you want to make it totally plant-based, just make sure to use the aquafaba that we whipped up. So I have some sliced almonds. You can also use slivered almonds. The difference is that sliced almonds still have the skin of the almond on them. So see, you can see there's little brown edges on the almonds. Slivered are blanched, meaning they're quickly boiled and then dried, which helps remove the skins. So they're purely white, but it's like an almond's quartered, so they're more like wedge shaped. I don't have those here to show you, but I like the texture of the sliced almonds a little bit better, but it's really your preference. Dump those in the bowl. And then you just want to use enough aquafaba or egg white to moisten the nuts so that the little bit of powdered sugar that we use in this recipe will stick. It also helps to crisp this up when we are baking in the oven. So now I'm just going to stir this up. And then the other thing before you have this done, although it's fine if it sits on the counter, is you want to preheat your oven to 350 degrees. And then you want to have a sheet pan here. I lined it with parchment paper. This is something that will tend to stick. Even if you use spray or oil, it's still very sticky on the pan. Anything with egg white, it just really tends to stick. So if you have any parchment or a Silpat, which is like a silicone baking mat, this is a really great time to use that. There's really very little sugar in here. It looked like a sizable volume, but it's powdered sugar. So, powdered sugar, you can use a much larger volume to the granulated or, what we call white sugar for the same amount of sugar by weight. All right, and this is really simple. This part's really simple. We'll get to the more complicated part later when we add the chocolate, but we're just going to pour these almonds and egg white and powdered sugar onto the pan and then spread them out. We want it to be a fairly thin layer but not have it all be separate. We want it to be a little clumpy. Kind of think, granola is what you're going for. You want the clumps to look like granola would. And then we're going to cook this in the oven until, stirring it occasionally during cooking, just until it's crispy, because you really want a nice crisp crunch when you bite into this. It will be coated in chocolate for the final product. And that's ready to go in the oven. Now we have our almonds and powdered sugar and egg white fully cooked, so I'm just finishing scraping off the parchment. I pulled it out from under the nuts. Part of it will just fall off, but you'll see that even with parchment, this non-stick surface, that you have quite a bit still sticking on there, and I'll show you still have to scrape it off with a spatula. You can also pull it off with your hands too if it's cooled enough. And that looks easy enough on parchment, but I promise you it is like glue if you haven't used it. And then once it's cool enough to touch, you just want to break it up so that it's, again, the size of largish clumps of granola. And then when you let it finish cooling, it will actually be crisp. So you want to take a little bite, make sure that it gives actually a little crunch in your mouth. If not, you can always return it to the oven for a few minutes. If it's still like gummy and bendy, it's more like taffy consistency if you try and bend the nuts and the egg white just hasn't fully cooked yet. And so what we'll do later on is when we have our chocolate ready to go, we'll put this in a mixing bowl, cover it with chocolate, and then portion it out. And I'm sure you're looking forward to that. So it's time to finish our Rochers now that we have either our tempered chocolate or, like I said, the quick version of the tempered chocolate. If you're doing the version which I assume you will do at home, which is where you just melt the chocolate and then sprinkle something on top, or melt the chocolate with a little bit of coconut oil, which is given in the recipe, You want to, I often get the question, can I use, you know, a little bit healthier fat? Can I use all the ones you're usually recommending that are liquid at room temperature, like olive oil, avocado oil, canola oil? And unfortunately, this is one place where if you want to avoid those added solid fats, you just don't use it and you just melt the chocolate, because the goal is really that you want the chocolate when it cools down to firm up again. And if you use a liquid oil, that's not going to get hard. So, you know, if you want to skip it, just melt your chocolate and just know you're going to have to put something on top to kind of cover up the kind of funky appearance you're going to get, or not care because it'll still be delicious no matter what it looks like. Or you can do that little bit of oil to give the sheen. Some people will also, you know, brush a little bit of vegetable oil on top if they want it to look pretty, but the texture is a little bit weird when you do that, when you put it in your mouth, if you are trying to get the shine that way. So for our Rochers, we're going to weigh out our chocolate in the bowl in just a second. Show you how to do that. If you have melted chocolate just for the recipe, then you'll have the appropriate amount. I melted chocolate for a variety of different things because there's no part of reality where I want to temper chocolate individually for a whole bunch of different recipes when I have more than one to make, because it's a lot of work. So I need about 6 ounces of the tempered chocolate. So an easy way to do that is if you just have an inexpensive baking scale. I just put my Rocher bowl on the scale. You push tare to get it to 0. I want to make sure it's 0. And then I'll just pour in the chocolate until you get to 6 ounces. How good does that look, right? So, and if you go a little over, that's okay. You want to go, if anything, a little over rather than a little under. I'm actually just going to put a little extra in there. Gets a little tricky if you don't have quite enough. So now what we want to do is work really quickly, because this chocolate's going to firm up quite fast on the cooled nuts. So we just want to stir, get everything really evenly coated. You really don't want to see the nuts. You want everything to be covered in chocolate. You know, and again, if you know, always good to melt a little extra chocolate if you feel like you need to add that. The 6 ounces to the proportion in the recipe should, if you stir it enough, should get it covered. And then if you have like a mini ice cream scoop or a scoop to portion cookies, then you can use that to make, you know, little scoops. I'm just going to show you how to make the little rocks, which again is what Rochers means, or Rocher means in French, with just a couple teaspoons. All right, I think we're almost everything is covered there. You know, it's not the end of the world if there's a little bit of the almond sticking out, but the goal is to get it mostly covered. So you basically, this is not going to look, they're not going to all look perfect. You just want to make like little piles. You want it as piled up as possible so that the chocolate, when it dries, it's going to hold those nuts together. So, and you know, it's chocolate and nuts, so you don't want a huge portion. It's, you know, mostly reasonably healthy calories, but it's still pretty calorie dense. So you just want, you know, kind of like a bite or two. If you want to have even smaller portions, a trick you can use is before you make the Rocher filling is you can chop up the nuts a little bit more so they're smaller pieces. They're kind of like the Rochers you would buy, you know, that are mass produced at the market. They have, you know, really finely chopped up nuts. And you also don't need to use almonds. I used almonds in these ones, but you know, hazelnuts are really, really good. Really any nut you like. I mean, what nuts aren't good dipped in chocolate with a little bit of sweetness added, so. And you just want to finish this right away. There's no like walking away to do something else. You'll come back and you'll just have a bowl full of nuts and chocolate, which is really delicious, but you'll have to like stab it to break it out with a spoon. Ask me how I know. And again, anything that's calorie dense with, you know, chocolate and nuts for dessert, I tend to serve a little bit of fresh fruit just to add that acid, lighten things up, and engage more in my palate. So we know that if we engage, you know, all of the different taste buds that we have, we're going to have a much more enjoyable experience because it, you know, just tastes more interesting rather than just having sweet or just having fat. Probably don't need to watch me finish all of these. So these are our Rochers, and we'll make sure to share a great picture with you when they're done and firmed up and with some accompanying items.